Emma discovers that her husband Jake and his parents have planned a public humiliation for their 6-year anniversary, a custom t-shirt reading 6 years of disappointment. After finding receipts, a burner phone, and financial transfers, Emma investigates, befriends a waitress who confirms the scheme, and reaches out to Michael, Jake's brother, who is erased by the family. Michael becomes her ally and lover. Together they secure legal/financial protection, plan a public counter-revelation at the restaurant, and Emma announces she's pregnant with Michael's child while exposing the Collins family's corruption and reclaiming her dignity. The morning after felt like a photograph you realize has been doctored. The same light, the same kitchen, but something in the grain had been altered. Emma moved through her house like someone in a half-remembered dream. The coffee tasted too bitter. The living room looked too staged. The sound of Jake's laughter in last year's videos felt like someone else's memory. 6 years of a life condensed into familiar objects. The chipped mug with her initials, the wedding portrait in the hallway, a pair of golf clubs leaning where the couch divided the room. All of it presentable, saleable, labeled. She should have noticed the small things. The new cologne that didn't smell like him, the way his hand slipped away when she reached for it, the late dinners with names that blurred into client or big pitch. She could have noticed. Instead, she learned by accident, a receipt that tumbled out of jeans on the laundry room floor like a confession. Black tea, white print, 6 years of disappointment. 3 words that sounded like a verdict. Her first reaction was disbelief. The next was a slow, cold awareness. Someone had plotted this. A public unmasking, rehearsed smiles, a corner table reserved for maximum exposure. That the outrage felt crafted made it worse, a private cruelty polished for display. Emma sat on the laundry room floor while the soft thrum of the washer hummed around her, and the world narrowed to ink and paper and the distant echo of her wedding vows. The receipt came with other small betrayals. Hotel charges on nights when the office was the excuse, jewelry purchased for pockets she never saw, transfers that skimmed their joint account in amounts just beneath alert thresholds. The house, the marriage, even the map of their routine had seams. She began to trace them. But this opening was not about immediate revenge. It was about recognition, the moment you stop excusing pain for the sake of comfort. In the mirror she had seen that person who deferred, the one who practiced smiles in the car mirror before family functions, who tolerated barbed comments as if they were weather. The receipt made her face another truth. Her life had been curated by other people, their names stitched into the margins. So she did not scream. She did not storm out with drama. Instead, she folded the receipt into the pocket of Jake's jacket, took a picture, and pretended, for now, to be ordinary. She sat through their weekdays and their Sunday mornings that had thinned into silence, and she listened, not for apology but for clues. When Jake said, "working late," she cataloged timestamps. When he kissed her cheek without meeting her eyes, she learned its distance. Finding betrayal is often less cinematic than you imagine. It comes in receipts and missed calls, in the way a house no longer feels like shelter. But these quiet discoveries are their own weapon. They give time to think, to move, to plan. Emma's anger burned, yes, but beneath it was a quieter current, the small, stubborn intelligence of someone who refuses to be staged into humiliation. She would not let the moment be taken from her in someone else's applause. That evening she drove to the cafe 3 blocks from Jake's office on a whim. The bell above the door chimed like an invitation. The server who remembered his order asked a question that had the shape of mercy. "Do you mind if I tell you something I've heard?" The confession that followed, about reserved tables, about cruel jokes told like jokes, was the next thread. A string, once pulled, revealed more knots than she'd thought. She left the cafe with a receipt photographed, a name, Vincenzo's, and the uneasy feeling of a plan forming around the edges of her life. The photograph of the t-shirt stayed on her phone all night. It was not a proof yet, it was a promise. Emma's world became a ledger. Every interaction, every card swipe, every sudden errand logged itself into a silent audit she kept in her head. She rebuilt the past 3 months like a spreadsheet: deposits, withdrawals, late-night locations, each line a pulse of proof. The methodical approach studied her. Anger alone was a flame, documentation was a map. On weekday afternoons, she began appointments that were, by themselves, banal. A quick meeting with a financial planner, a consultation with an attorney who specialized in discrete separations, an introduction to a realtor who'd handled partitions and quick moves discreetly. Professional appointments gave her permission to be strategic rather than spectacular. Vanessa Chin, the planner, explained thresholds and protections in a tone that turned panic into procedure. Inheritances classified differently, joint assets traceable, the legal levers that could keep a household from unraveling into ruin. Emma listened, took notes, and asked the questions she should have asked years ago. Between appointments, she cultivated quiet intelligence. She learned how to extract messages from a burner phone without knocking the whole nest loose, how to save bank statements with timestamps, how to copy receipts without leaving a trace. Stealth had a taste, not glamorous, but necessary. It calmed her that she could act where emotion could not. The social geography of their marriage shifted as she walked it anew. She visited neighbors under the pretext of pie or small talk, and Mrs. Porter, a neighbor who smelled of lavender and knew the Collins family longer than anyone, became a pocket of history. She learned, over tea, about a brother who'd been erased, a silence that was chosen and enforced. That name, Michael, arrived not as a hero but as a missing person with a file of grudges and documentation tucked behind his absence. Michael's first reply to her LinkedIn message was terse: Cornerstone Cafe, Sunday noon. She spent the drive wondering about motives. Was he a salvaging angel or another player playing their own game? Her heart hammered, not with expectation, but with a precise, wary hope. When she saw him, he carried himself like a man who had left something behind and kept the receipt. He was similar to Jake in jaw and profile, different in the set of his eyes, guarded, careful, and not inclined to charade. Their first conversation was blunt. They traded family stories like painful heirlooms. Michael's account of being cut loose by his father for asking about accounting practices landed with a weight that reframed everything. What Emma had called coldness in the Collins household was structural, a system that disciplined dissent, elevated appearance, and punished anyone who threatened leverage. Michael's erasure explained both the T-shirt and the transfers. When he slid a manila folder across the table, Emma felt the room tilt. Inside were original partnership agreements that looked like relics. They named Michael as a stakeholder who'd been stricken from later documents. He had proof. He had reasons, he had scars. He had also, against odds and careful decisions, kept a life apart. His presence was not an answer so much as an opportunity. The practical alliance was immediate. Michael introduced her to his contacts, an attorney who knew how to resurrect erased signatures, an accountant who could trace siphoned funds. Their collaboration was not romantic at first, it was logistical. How to freeze funds without triggering legal alarms, how and when to move assets, how to ensure evidence could withstand a counterclaim. The intimacy of paperwork replaced the intimacy she'd once craved in Jake's absence. But human patterns seep into strategy. Shared late nights, whispered plans, the small-way treachery tastes of embers, they are combustible. When Michael's hand brushed hers while comparing notes, it was a small, honest touch that felt like a promise of warmth rather than a calculation. Emma tightened her resolve because the stakes were now larger than public humiliation, a child, a claim, a future. Yet not everything moved smoothly. There were near misses that reminded her of risk's presence, a misfiled document that briefly vanished, an email nearly sent to the joint inbox, a waiter who recognized her from the cafe and blinked at her when she tried to be invisible. These moments made her plan more measured. They also taught her patience. Revenge without readiness is its own humiliation. As the anniversary approached, she rehearsed 2 languages at once. One was legalese, what to say, how to show proof, when to invoke counsel. The other was performance, how to hold space in public, how to command attention without becoming hysterical, how to turn a family's cruel theater into their own undoing. She practiced short, calm sentences in the mirror, listening for the exact rhythm that would let evidence land like cold facts rather than theatrics. Her allies multiplied quietly. Megan, the waitress, agreed to keep her eyes open at Vincenzo's. The realtor had prepared contingencies for a quick closing. Michael's lawyer had prepped documents for immediate filing. The siege was organized not with spectacle but with preparation. The small team felt fierce because every member had been burned by the Collins machine in a different registry. On a rain-thin evening 2 weeks out, Emma sat with Michael in an empty park, the bench slick from drizzle. He slid a photocopy of a bank ledger across his knees. Their plan was now a list of timestamps. It read like a map of betrayal. It also read like a plan of escape. She folded the paper into her purse and, for the first time in months, felt the possibility of movement, not toward spite, but toward something like freedom. Risk always arrives as a small crack you didn't factor. For Emma, the crack was a text, a string of numbers, a coordinate, and the name Diane. It arrived while she sat in Michael's apartment, a rainstorm kneading the windows. Diane, the assistant, had always been a peripheral shadow, the blonde who slipped into family dinners like a punctuation mark. Emma had assumed Diane was only an accessory to Jake's secrecy. The text read, "Saw him. Tonight. Room 614. It was a logistical detail, but its implication was poison. That night Jake announced a last-minute client dinner. He left with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and his car blinked away under an umbrella of streetlight. Emma's stomach knotted. The plan had insisted on Jake being off stage for a few hours tonight. She grabbed a jacket and followed the map of small betrayals, receipts, cab entries, motions of his day. Michael kept the burner phone he'd discovered plugged into a charger like a central nervous system, forwarding incoming details to Emma. Her role had shifted from researcher to reactionary to intercept. At the hotel lobby, the air smelled like citrus and conference coffee. Emma moved through it as a woman who'd practiced observation for weeks, noting the way hands fidgeted, the cadence of voices, the tiny habits that betray truth. They found Jake at the bar with Diane leaning close, laughing a laugh he'd never shared with her. The sight landed like an illicit confirmation. Diane's designer bag sat on the stool, her shoes crossed like a calculated statement. This was not an accident. It was the celebration of a private arrangement. The instinct to storm in and create a scene gnawed at Emma, but preparation had taught restraint. Instead, she photographed, logged, recorded. Michael watched from the stairwell, his face a mask of stoicism. That evening's new evidence became an accelerant. The next 2 days blurred into legal emails and hurried transfers. Vanessa arranged for dummy signatures to mask moves that needed discretion. The realtor created contingency selling scenarios in case speed became necessity. Emma moved assets that could be her lifeline. But the midpoint twist was not simply that Jake had another woman. It was what came after, a message on Michael's burner phone from someone named Dad that suggested his father had begun to suspect Michael's resurfacing. The Collins patriarch's empire was not only wealthy, it had allies and levers. The family's network started to stir. A client who had been friendly with Richard made a pointed comment to Michael's attorney. A quiet board member began asking questions about family stability. Suddenly the threat level escalated, legal maneuvers, threats of countersuits, and whispers in the town club that Michael's reappearance might be opportunism. Emma realized then that their plan had consequences beyond embarrassment. Exposing the Collins family publicly would not only humiliate them, it risked a legal and reputational pushback that could entangle her, Michael, and the child she carried. The line between vindication and peril narrowed. Michael's documents were powerful, but a family with resources could make litigation costly and vindictive. She and Michael recalibrated. They added layers of protection, a preliminary injunction drafted, witness affidavits lined up, and multiple copies of documents stored with a trusted lawyer in another state. They rehearsed testimony, prepared for smear campaigns, and lined up a journalist friend who would ensure public record if the family tried to bury evidence. The plan pivoted from public spectacle to strategic exposure, timed disclosures, legal muscle, and an awareness of the media mechanisms that could protect truth by making it visible. Meanwhile, the intimacy between Emma and Michael deepened in honest, small ways. It wasn't a whirlwind so much as a series of moments that revealed tenderness. A hand at the small of her back when thunder shook the building, a text at dawn with a brief check-in, the way he left her a half-finished cup of coffee because he knew she liked it warm. The pregnancy, the single line on a test, became a pressure and a blessing. It forced both to consider legacies in literal terms. This child would carry a surname, a legal relation, and a moral inheritance. But the pressure also exposed fault lines. Michael confessed that revealing the original partnership would likely draw his father's most bruising retaliation, including attempts to discredit him as unstable or opportunistic. He had lost everything once before and sworn never to fight for the scraps. Now, with Emma pregnant and the Collins machine moving, he faced a choice that could cost his career, safety, and even the fragile new life he'd begun. That night, as thunder pealed over the city, they argued not about strategy, but about courage. "If we go public," Michael said, "they will come at us hard." Emma's answer was quiet and immovable. "Then we'll make sure the world sees what they do." Not revenge. Truth. It was not bravado. It was a decision shaped by months of small, disciplined preparation. The midpoint twist had changed the parameters, no longer only about pride. This was now a fight for legal safety and a future for a child whose first memory shouldn't be the cameras. They slept few hours that night. Dawn found Emma awake, stilled by the weight of choice. The plan had to work, but it also had to be defensible. The rest of the game would be played not only by performance, but by law. The stakes had become both intimate and systemic, and she felt the peculiar, fierce clarity of someone finally ready to burn the script that had been written for her. The stretch between revelation and reckoning felt like a tight wire. Each step had to be measured, each exposure timed. Emma's rehearsals turned from lines into legal choreography. She kept a folder of red tabs in her bag, copies of bank transfers, text transcripts, hotel receipts, the original partnership documents Michael had produced. Each tab was a small detonator, evidence ready to be revealed in precise order. They sharpened the public moment. Megan the waitress would be positioned near the entrance at Vincenzo's to give a subtle nod when the timing was right. Michael's lawyer prepared sealed affidavits to be opened if the Collins camp attempted to discredit him. Vanessa the planner stayed on call, ready to attest to the financial trails. The realtor kept a signed, but not yet filed sale agreement, an insurance move to show Emma could exit materially secure. The team resembled a small theater crew, cues, lighting, scripts, stagehands. At home, the fissures widened like a map. Jake's aloofness hardened into irritability. He became more performative, practicing smiles he thought looked spontaneous. Barbara began inviting neighborhood hosts to brunch with a particular obsession, as if rehearsing her public persona before the big night. Emma watched them with a clinical eye, cataloging gestures and pulling apart their timing. She learned that cruelty became a ritual in people who feared being ordinary. Humiliation was their theater. There were close calls. A waiter almost delivered the t-shirt box to the wrong table. A courier paused in the lobby before delivering a document with a signature block that nearly revealed Michael's claim prematurely. In each moment, Emma felt adrenaline spike, then ease. The plan survived because they treated contingency as default, because they admitted possibility of failure and prepared for it. As the day closed toward the anniversary, Emma sat in the dim light of Michael's apartment with her hand on her stomach. She spoke aloud the words she would use at the toast, not because they needed polishing, but because sound made them real. She practiced the pause that would let the pregnancy announcement drop into the room like a stone in a quiet pond. Her voice was steady. It had to be. A public unraveling required unmoved patience, fury wrapped in the calm of someone who'd rehearsed truth until it could not be mistaken for anger. Michael, meanwhile, had to navigate being seen. He walked the fine line between appearing vindictive and appearing legitimate. His legal team coached him to speak in facts, not accusations, to avoid rhetorical flourishes that could be twisted into motives. He resented the carefulness, but he was grateful for it. Emma's tough calm grounded him. When he watched her rehearse, his eyes softened. In private, he was careful not to touch the wound that still existed between him and his father. In public, he would be the instrument. They added another safeguard, a journalist contact, discreet and ethical, who agreed to hold certain documents pending public release. The journalist's role wasn't to sensationalize, but to neutralize erasure, to ensure the records had an independent timestamp. This guarantee felt like armor. Daylight on the anniversary arrived with ordinary grace. It was impossible to know if the weather conspired with life. Emma dressed in the blue sheath she'd chosen because it read as composed and true, a color she hadn't been allowed in family photos. She pinned her grandmother's pearls, feeling their cool weight like a talisman. When Jake offered a cigarette on the porch, an attempt at gallantry, she smiled and nodded, letting him feel the illusion of control. Her calm was a weapon. At Vincenzo's, the corner table looked like a stage. Richard and Barbara were already animated with cruel anticipation, their gestures precise, as if they'd practiced applause. Nearby diners offered the kind of privacy that public spectacle provides, attention. The restaurant's opulence flattened into a theater, and the Collins family prepared to be the stars of their own small tragedy. Emma's entrance surprised some, not because she was late, but because her face carried the expression of someone who had finished mourning. She had learned to carry legality like armor, tenderness like a private consolation. She sat, drank the first sip, felt the bubbles of champagne climb like small promises of breath. The dinner threads began to weave. Conversation hummed. The trap, as they planned and practiced, was in the toast. The T-shirt would land like a grenade. But for the first time in many years, Emma felt steady at the center of it all. The build to climax had been practical and mercilessly realistic. It had stripped the romantic fantasies of revenge of their glitters and replaced them with slow, unromantic work, documentation, contacts, legal strategy, alliances formed in small cafes, and a tenderness born of shared injury. When the first ding of the knife against the flute sounded, it landed on ears prepped to listen, but it did not catch her unaware. She rose when Jake signaled, not as a captive, but as the conductor of the room's attention. Her voice would carry the sequence they'd rehearsed, the calm fact of transfers, the evidence of documents, the name of the woman who had been more fiction than friend, and finally, the truth that would reframe everything. She felt the small human tremor, the fear that comes with stepping into the middle of a world you're about to change, and made it a part of her rhythm. Outside, city lights twinkled unaware. Inside, the family's theater clicked into place. The stage was set. Jake's knife pinged across the crystal, and the restaurant's hubbub folded into an expectant hush. He stood with the self-satisfied posture of a man who believed cruelty would land a spectacle. To 6 years, he announced, voice lacquered in triumph, and to being free, single, and searching. Then he reached under the table for the box, the prop that would make humiliation tactile. Emma felt the temperature of the room change, oxygen condensing into attention. Cameras' phones turned like small lighthouses. Faces in the dim saw the movement, read the intention, watched the reveal. She smiled, not from pain but from a peculiar readiness. Jake's smirk sliced the air. Barbara leaned forward, an expectant viper. Richard's eyes found hers with a look that was part ownership, part irritation that his script had been adhered to so dutifully. The box opened. The T-shirt unfolded, black fabric and white type. 6 years of disappointment. The restaurant's laugh felt like knives. Emma waited. She had rehearsed this moment until the words fit like currency. She lifted her water glass and let a cool smile settle. "Thank you, Jake," she said, voice measured, the syllables curated for maximum clarity. "How thoughtful." Confusion flickered over the Collins faces. Jake's smirk mid-fade, a crack forming. She held their gaze, not pleading but factual. "While we're trading honesty tonight, there are things we should all know." Her hand moved smoothly to her purse, cameras tilted closer. She produced a stapled packet with the red tabs, placed it on the table with the calm of someone setting down a legal instrument. "Those transactions we've both noticed? I've documented them. There's an almost $80,000 pattern of transfers from our joint accounts to an account you didn't think I could trace." Her voice was quiet enough to be intimate and loud enough to land. A ripple of discomfort moved through the table. Jake's jaw worked. Barbara's breath drew short. Emma watched Poison meet panic. She had been careful to keep the facts incontrovertible, copies of statements, timestamps, confirmations from the advisor who'd been tipped to look out for such transfers. "I've secured half our savings," she continued. "I've also signed a listing agreement for the house. The signatures you think control me were done while Jake was distracted with work documents he'd initialed without reading. I suggest you check your paperwork more carefully." The family oriented toward damage control, but Emma had arranged for a second blow. Michael entered then, not with flourish, but with a measured stroll, the door catching his silhouette as if the room had been waiting to close around him. Gasps hummed like electricity. He set down a leather folder and opened it. Original partnership papers, yellowing but clear, signed by Richard's father and notarized. He spoke in a voice that carried the sound of long exile. "These names are on record. My stake was never lawfully removed." The room tilted. Richard's polite composure unraveled. His hands went to the table as if to anchor himself. Barbara's face moved through shades of collapse and rage. "You've orchestrated this," she spat, voice a brittle edge. Emma met it with the simplest declaration of the night. "No. You did." The words landed like a verdict. Michael's attorney slid a sealed affidavit into Emma's hands, affidavits that, if pushed, would be filed within days. The waitress, Megan, from behind a tray, watched with the embarrassed grin of someone who'd whispered truth and been heard. Emma felt the weight of something new, not triumph exactly, but rightful reclamation. There was one more truth that made the room inhale as if the air itself had been rearranged. She set a small card on the table and said, "One more thing." Her voice steadied, a smile easing. "I'm pregnant." The word in that context was an assertion of continuity, of consequence. It rewired their cruelty. Barbara's lips parted in disbelief. Jake's face found a mask of outrage. Richard looked like a man calculating losses. No one expected the tenderness that followed. Michael's hand finding Emma's across the table, an anchor that read as claim and care at once. The diners around them shifted from voyeuristic glee to shocked silence. Conversations that had been snatches of eavesdropping now folded into watching a family's exposed sinew. Jake rose abruptly, anger flaring. "This is a circus," he said, voice thin and dangerous. "You've planned a spectacle." Emma stood, her movement unhurried. "No," she corrected quietly. "You planned it for me. I decided to tell the truth." She looked at each of them, at Barbara's brittle composure, at Richard's red face, at Jake's stunned expression, and the power in the room seemed to lean toward her. There were shouts, indignations, the rustle of napkins. Richard slammed his fist on the table. It was an act intended to reclaim dignity, but landed as the desperate thump of a man whose fabric had been pulled. Patrons craned forward toward their phones. In minutes, the restaurant's intimate theater would be translated into social feeds. Emma did not flinch. She had expected this. Michael set the original partnership papers in front of each of them and spoke plainly of documents and audits and the truth he would put before a court. He made clear that revelations were not theater but legal reality. The couple rose in a press of paper and presence, the Collins face collapsing into private fury. As they stormed out, Emma allowed herself one human thing, a breath she had been holding for years. Outside, the air tasted sharp, clean, real. The cameras had done their work. The Collins family left with their script in tatters. Emma and Michael walked away hand in hand, footsteps steady on the pavement. He squeezed her fingers once softly. "Are you okay?" he asked. She felt the movement of grief and triumph braided together and finally, irrevocably, a new shape of future. "Yes," she said. "I am." The aftermath was not a triumphant montage. It was paperwork, phone calls, and the slow unpeeling of a life. News outlets picked up the restaurant scene with predictable hunger. Some frames were cruel, others sympathetic. But the visibility that once terrified Emma now acted like protective glass. When accusation begins in public, the family's attempts at erasure lose potency. Records existed now outside living rooms and private ledgers. Jake filed angry emails that read like wounded entitlement. Barbara attempted to circulate private photographs, hoping to humiliate instead of explain. Richard's legal counsel sent cease and desist letters with the force of litigious muscle. The Collins machine word. Emma met each volley with the calm training of someone who had rehearsed offense and defense in equal measure. Her attorney filed motions. Michael's counsel filed documentation restoring legal stake. Vanessa compiled the financial trails that were impossible to deny. There were small victories and long negotiations. The house sale unfolded with the slow arithmetic of asset division. Some accounts were frozen pending discovery, others reclassified as separate property. Divorce papers went through the measured mechanics of law. The town that once traded whispers at the country club now whispered differently, scandal and sympathy circulating in equal measure. For Emma, the public scrutiny had a cost. Old friends took sides, some were distant, but with it came a strange freedom. The bounds of toleration that had kept her small were broken. She could sign her name without someone else's approval. The pregnancy became a quiet center of the storm. The first trimester was a tangle of morning nausea and nervous joy, but Michael's steadiness became ritual. At the clinic, he held her hand and translated the doctor's lab-slow cadence into humor to make it bearable. He met her parents alone. The meeting was awkward but honest. He phoned his own lawyer with a new ferocity, not for revenge, but to ensure there would be a legal inheritance for a child who had the right to know a truth about lineage and legitimacy. Their relationship, formed in the clay of shared injury, grew carefully. It was not a cinematic whirlwind. It was grocery lists and late-night documents and a soft, private humor that built in the spaces between legal calls. Michael told stories of the boy he'd been, of leaving town with a single suitcase and a stubborn belief that integrity mattered more than legacy. Emma listened, and in the quiet of ordinary hours, she found him not as a rescuer, but as a companion who had chosen consequence over comfort. Months passed. The legal entanglements settled into an ordinary rhythm of hearings and mediated settlements. Michael won a motion that re-established his stake in the partnership as a possibility to be litigated. The threat of exposure and the weight of documentary evidence made the Collins family more cautious than vengeful. It was not the neat triumph of a movie ending, but it was justice of an operatic kind, not annihilation, but accountability. Emma moved from the house that had been a stage of performances she never chose. She found an apartment with light and a small balcony where she could plant herbs. The first time she put soil under her fingers and watched green push through, she felt the simple miracle of growth that no ledger could quantify. The child's first ultrasound, a small flicker on a screen, made the months of strategy feel like a prelude. She read articles to the sound of Michael's calm voice off in the kitchen and felt, for the first time, how ordinary joy could arrive after storms. There were still quiet moments where loss registered. She mourned the life she had thought she would share with Jake, the small rituals, the way a partner's fingers used to know the curve of her shoulder. She mourned the time lost to a family that had never wanted her. Mourning, however, became part of a broader reclamation. She arranged a small ceremony with friends to mark the end of the marriage, not a spectacle but a witness. People came with casseroles and with bouquets, and with apology for times they'd failed to notice. On a mild Sunday morning, months later, Emma walked through a farmer's market with Michael at her side, the child's kicks becoming a private punctuation. They bought peaches and laughed about tiny things, their voices low and easy. At a stall selling second-hand books, they found a battered copy of a novel Emma had loved at 20. She bought it and tucked it beneath her arm like a small promise. They did not need to prove anything to anyone. Their life unfolded in quiet competence. At night, when the world was still, Emma sometimes opened the email from Mrs. Porter, a small note about a pie recipe, a bit of gossip. It read now with warmth rather than woundedness. She'd gotten phone calls from strangers who'd seen the restaurant video and were grateful she'd shown courage. There were some hate messages too. Cruelty persists in corners. But hate is noise when truth is legible. In the end, the story's last image was not dramatic. It was domestic and stubborn and wholly ordinary, Michael reading aloud as the child in her belly moved, Emma tracing the lines of his face with her thumb, the sound of a kettle boiling in their tiny kitchen. The Collins family's stain on their history could not be scrubbed entirely, but it no longer dictated the terms of their future. Emma's freedom was quieter than the toast had promised, but it was truer. She had traded performance for integrity, humiliation for documented truth, and in that trade she'd found something more valuable, a life chosen, with a companion who had stayed when leaving would have been easier, and a child who would inherit neither cruelty nor erasure. She thought, sometimes, of the t-shirt folded in a drawer somewhere in the Collins house, its phrase meant to wound now a relic of someone else's small theater. She pictured it there, meaningless. Her laugh at the image was soft and unguarded. On a warm evening as light folded into dusk, she rested her hand on her belly and whispered, not to anyone in particular, "We are going to be okay." The small life inside seemed to answer with a flutter, and she believed it.